All right, welcome all to our second annual St. Michael Academy C.S. Lewis Festival of Petoskey Student Essay Contest. I'm Dr. Richard Brake. I'm the headmaster here at St. Michael Academy, and it's wonderful to have an event with people in this era of COVID. All right, so let's stand, and I think you'll find out that the prayer we're going to pray is the St. Michael prayer, which has a lot of relevance for this essay contest. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. St. Michael, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. Do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, evil spirits, who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, thank you. You can take your seats. When we started our academic year this year, there was a ton of uncertainty, right? But we're almost through the first quarter. So far, so good. And we're really excited that in some ways this is kind of a celebration of the return to school and a celebration of our wonderful students who are just exceptional. We've got 4 finalists of this essay contest who are obviously the cream of the crop, but all of these students who wrote these essays, this is hard. This book is hard, right? It's a hard book, and they all did really, really well. And so I think it's a celebration of our students tonight. So thank you for being here. What did you hear in that prayer? St. Michael the Archangel, right? Defend us in battle. Be our protection, what? Against the wickedness and snares of the devil. Okay? And then I think later on it talks about how he's prowling about doing what? Seeking the ruin of souls. So, sometimes when we say that prayer, it becomes kind of rote, doesn't it? You just say it, kind of in one ear, out the other. But, when C.S. Lewis was writing this book in the early 1940s, what was raging in Great Britain? World War II. And if you know the history, who's left against the juggernaut of a pretty godless German regime? England. That was it. So he's writing this during the Blitz, when the bombs are raining down on London. Okay? And so why is he thinking about the devil in 1940 during World War II? Because the devil is all around him. Okay? The devil is all around him. And so he ends up writing this book, and I think it resonates then, it resonates now, and especially now because I think there's a lot of folks who, even Christians, who kind of want to have this no devil, no hell Christianity, right? It's kind of like all the good stuff, right? And then all that evil, I don't know, But if you really think hard about your answer, about whether there is a hell and whether there is a devil, depending on what your answer is, you're going to have a very different form of Christianity, aren't you? Okay? And so that's kind of what I really wanted our kids to wrestle with in this essay is the devil real? Is the devil real not just out there, but in where? In your life, right? In your life. Does he, you got the angel on the one shoulder, right? Who's over there? And they're talking to each other. They're talking to you. And, we want to fill our bucket, so to speak, with prayer. Because if you're not filling it with prayer and good thoughts, who's going to start filling it for you? All right. And so that's kind of, that's what you're going to hear tonight, I think, from our students. The first part of the essay was we asked them to summarize the book, kind of a good old summer reading essay. What did I do? What did I read during summer break? But then what I really wanted them to do is to talk about, what's going on in your soul. How do you try to combat the devil? Okay? And then I asked them, if you were the opposite of Screwtape, because you're going to find out who Screwtape is and who Wormer. These are devils, right? And one's a teacher and one's a novice. So now, how about if you were not a devil, but an angel? How would you counteract that? What would be your what would be your recommendations and your counsel to try to beat back what the devil is doing for you? Okay, so that was kind of what they were asked to do. As I said, C.S. Lewis wrote this in 1940. His brother had just returned from the front as a major in World War II. And of course, C.S. Lewis during World War I served in World War I and was an atheist. And when he came back, his experience converted him to Christianity. A lot of people, it was the opposite effect, that World War I actually turned them to atheism. Okay, so his younger brother is coming back from World War II, and he and his brother were having a discussion, and they started talking about what they saw both in World War I and World War II. And again, the devil pops up in both of these guys' head. So he decides he's going to write this. He says, "I had never written anything more easily, but I never wrote with less enjoyment." That's an interesting observation, right? That it came easily to him because I think he knew that the devil was in his life, but it wasn't very fun. So he knocks it out very, very quickly. And then they serialized it. You know what I mean by that? They were radio interviews and newspapers. And so each of these little chapters were installments during the war. So as Great Britain, as England is trying to push back against the Blitz, they're reading this stuff from C.S. Lewis, and it's a hit, right? It's a kind of a bestseller type of thing. And so then after the war, they compile it all together, and they also record and they put together all of his BBC interviews, which later become the basis for Mere Christianity. So he's doing Mere Christianity and the Screwtape Letters at the same time during World War II. So just a little background on that. And the book was dedicated, Screwtape, to his fellow Inkling J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay? And Tolkien actually, interestingly, wasn't terribly excited about that because he kind of took it personally. Like, what are you saying to me? Like, do I need help with the devil? You know, that you are dedicating this book to me, but I think they worked it out. So that is the background for the book. That's the background for the project. So what we're going to do tonight, a little different than we did last year, is that we're going to hear from all four essayists, okay? And we're going to kind of work it like a symposium, okay? So we're going to do it alphabetically. They're going to come up, they're going to read their essay, and then they're going to field any questions that you guys might have. And these aren't going to be gotcha questions. I've assured them that they're not gotcha questions, okay? But you're going to hear them, and there might be something that you want to talk about. Okay? So we're going to have a conversation, in other words, a conversation raised by the points that these young scholars are putting forth. And so we'll do that, each one. Once they're done, then the next one will come up, okay? And we'll listen to all four, and then I'll come back up, and then we'll do the little drum roll, and we'll find out who was fourth, third, second, and first. I will tell you, and when I come back, I'll share with you some of the assessments of the judges themselves, all three of them which were PhDs on the C.S. Lewis Festival, a literary, a theologian, and a philosopher. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about what they said about the writing that they were reading. Okay, and but the difference between first and second was 1 point. Then there was a gap of 3 points, and then the difference between third and fourth was 1 point. Okay? So all of them did extremely well. Okay? I wish I could give all first places, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Okay? So understand how the night's going to go? Yep. Ready to go? All right, so first up is, again, just because his alphabet, his name is with a G, William Gagnon is going to come up and talk about it.
The Screwtape Letters begin in the midst of a correspondence between two demons, Screwtape and Wormwood. Screwtape is an older demon who has taken it upon himself to mentor his nephew Wormwood in the ways of temptation. Their goal is to lead their patient into hell. The 31 letters describe the demon's strategy to go about doing this. They attack the patient's faith, prevent him from developing virtue, and corrupt his relationships. They fight with the enemy who is trying to keep the patient out of Satan's grasp and work to keep the patient unaware of the battle that is being fought for his soul. The letters are set during World War II, and after undergoing many peaks and troughs in his faith, the patient has a strong conversion to Christianity, perishes in a bombing, and escapes from Wormwood. Wormwood's failure is punished by torture, and the letters conclude with Screwtape preparing to eat Wormwood alive. Among the lessons Screwtape teaches Wormwood is the importance of corrupting the patient's faith. This can be done by changing the way the patient prays, preventing him from realizing the social implications of an honest faith, and by perverting his faith into a means rather than an end. Screwtape understands that it's very easy for Christians to use their faith as a means for self-advancement or social justice, taking the Lord's gift of salvation and finding it valuable only because it can be used for bettering society. In these ways, the patient believes he is following God's will and living the faith, but in reality is doing the opposite. Faith is also corrupted when the patient becomes aware of his virtues. Once the patient is aware that he's being virtuous, the virtues become less formidable. He starts developing spiritual pride in his faithfulness. He believes he is building virtue, but is accomplishing nothing when such pride is developing. This spiritual pride is very useful to Screwtape and Wormwood when it develops. The patient becomes so proud that he has found the right church and the right group of friends that he mocks all other Christians that don't belong to his exact sect. In these ways, what the patient believes to be a strong faithfulness to God becomes a corrupted version of religion that leads down the path to hell. Like Screwtape says, a spoiled saint, a Pharisee, an inquisitor, or a magician makes better sport in hell than a mere common tyrant or debauchee. Screwtape also emphasizes the importance of keeping the patient from recognizing the concept of universal truth. Screwtape advises to keep the patient's focus on the stream of immediate sensory experiences and to label these things as real life. Keeping the patient's attention away from high-concept universal questions and more concerned with the materialist niceties of the physical world is a sure way to keep him from stumbling upon the logical truths apparent within Christianity. Another tactic Screwtape advises is the importance of controlling and destroying human relationships. Early on in the letters, Wormwood tries to corrupt the patient's relationship with his mother. He tries to draw out all the little irritations that occur on a daily basis until they despise each other. He allows the patient to set a double standard of calling out his mother's sins while failing to recognize his own. Furthermore, Screwtape delights when the patient begins spending time around superficially intellectual skeptics. Interacting with these materialists on a regular basis allows him to focus even more on the physical world. Even when he realizes that these people's beliefs are in direct contradiction to his Christian worldview, he can be convinced to stay in these two worlds, becoming a different person for each group he enters, like an actor adopting a role. Eventually, the patient begins courting a young Christian woman whom Screwtape despises, but soon realizes can be used in his advantage. He tells Wormwood to begin sowing seeds that will grow to become domestic hatred, to get the patient to act purposely unselfish as a form of pride, and to cause the patient to lust after her. Screwtape recognizes that virtuous human relationships are one of the best ways to defeat temptation, but can become easily controlled. When the war begins, Wormwood is delighted in the prospect of such levels of human suffering, but Screwtape warns him to hope not too much from a war. War reminds us of our mortality, and as Christians this can be a very good thing. Humans naturally long for something greater than earth. Christians know that this longing is for heaven, but Screwtape would want us to believe that we can create heaven on earth through social, economic, and scientific progress. But the constant reminder of mortality that a war brings to mind thoughts of the next life. It forces self-reflection. Screwtape works to keep the patient regarding death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. As well as this, Screwtape and Wormwood can use the fear that war brings to create hatred for the Germans and slow the development of virtue. Despite all their efforts, Screwtape and Wormwood lose the patient to heaven. The patient does not allow his faith to become corrupted. He does this by surrounding himself with intelligent Christians and an environment that fosters virtue. In addition, he is aware of his shortcomings and is self-reflective and honest in his prayer. As a result, he lives in eternal joy in heaven. The Screwtape letters describe many strategies that the devil uses to snare souls, but his greatest weapon is ignorance. Being aware that the devil exists and then recognizing how he interacts with us is the first step to rejecting him. It is vitally important that we understand our own proclivities as humans. We have many bodily desires that were created by God and when properly followed lead us to ultimate fulfillment in him, but that are very easily hijacked by the devil. Our natural desire to love is corrupted in the vice of lust, for example. Because we have a higher intellect, we're able to recognize when these desires become disordered. The devil enhances these natural desires within us and prevents us from recognizing when they have become unnatural. Without this self-awareness, we can become controlled by our desires without recognizing it. But once we understand our body's desires, know where they belong, and how the devil tries to pull them from their proper place, he is no longer hidden, and we can fight him when he comes. But the devil is clever. He doesn't show himself when you're at your strongest. He appears when you're tired, stressed, or despairing. He comes during the trough periods of your faith that Lewis describes. He tells you there is no purpose to your fight against temptation. He tells you your desires of gluttony, rage, envy, and lust are natural. He challenges your faithfulness at the moments you feel most vulnerable. Because the devil comes to us at our weakest, it is easy for us to fall from the Lord in these moments, but Screwtape offers some insight regarding these trough periods. He explains that in order for us to come to the Lord out of true love, we must do it out of our own will. The Lord gives us graces to help us overcome temptation, and during these times we are at a peak of our faith, but this does not last long. Eventually, he leaves us to stand up on our own legs, as Lewis describes. We can then experience spiritual dryness and a sense of abandonment from God. But it is at these times that we are growing most in our love for him. Like Screwtape says, the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. The devil works to keep us unaware of his effect in our lives. He wants us to be ignorant of the truth behind our desires and keep us from turning to God when we feel the lowest. While the Screwtape letters focus on the devil's role in our life, God is also fighting for our souls. This is clear in Screwtape's misunderstanding of God's love. Lewis describes the devil in the Screwtape letters as being unable to comprehend the selflessness of God's love, specifically his self-sacrifice upon the cross. This love is our greatest weapon against Satan. God's love for us should be the model for our lives. Christ's action upon the cross was completely selfless, asking for nothing in return. It is in this way that we should love all people. But this is not a pleasant thing. The devil wants us to think of love in a superficial, adolescent kind of way, the kind of love that feels good. But Christ suffered on the cross, with nails in his hands and thorns on his head. His love was not pleasant. This love takes nothing and gives everything. It is this love that God gives to us and that we are called to give back to him. We do this by submitting ourselves to suffering in our battles with Satan. Satan draws out our greatest weaknesses, and without a will strong enough to fight him with the same strength that Christ showed on the cross, we will fall every time. Following in Christ's example of love, we are called to defeat Satan and help others do the same. Perhaps the greatest thing the Screwtape letters does is actualize the devil's role in our lives. By describing all the subtle interactions that the devil has with us, Lewis removes the cartoon devil from our head and transforms him into something real. Without a belief in the devil, Christianity becomes a philosophy rather than a religion. Removing the devil removes any reality to Christ's message of an afterlife. Many Christians cannot bring themselves to believe that God would subject us to eternal damnation and would rather live in ignorance, but the devil's existence is clear directly from the words of Christ. It is important to remember that we should live virtuously out of love for God, not out of fear of hell. And it is this love, should we be willing to return it, that will save us in the end. Yeah, sure. I really think it's all about self-reflection. I think as being raised as a Catholic, it's easy to fall into the natural tendencies of I go to Mass, I know the 10 Commandments, I'm doing okay, right? You assume that you're doing okay. But as soon as you take a couple minutes to actually think about it and actually try to live the gospel in your life, you realize that you're not doing it. Maybe this is not true for you guys, but when I started doing this, you realize that you're not doing it at all. I mean, not even close. And so being able to have some real self-reflection goes a long way. And being able to name the sin, right? You have to be able to do that to yourself because, well, it's for your benefit, but you're doing it for the Lord.
Yeah, sure.
What really struck me about the way that you approached this is that you were very
you're very direct. You didn't use any flowery words or beat around the bush at all. You were very direct in the way that you read this book, in the way that you think that you should approach your faith. And I think that's a very difficult thing for many people to, or at least myself, to approach my faith in that way. I think that the way you put it is very easy to you did it in a very, very good way, an inspiring way.
Yeah, and I think I did that for my own benefit, I think, because you gotta go back to the basics at some point and realize that you're not living a Christian life. And this kind of direct message, I'm writing this for myself, really, is telling myself in the most direct way that this is something that you have to actually live. You can't just believe it, you have to live it, right? And so that kind of language makes it easier for me, I suppose, to take action rather than getting lost in adjectives and that kind of thing. But
upon self-reflection, which is fantastic, I'm just interested upon reading this book, has it become I don't want to say easier, but easier or maybe more difficult in terms of your faith life? Because, like you said, awareness sometimes, and we're reading Frankenstein right now too, awareness sometimes make things just a little bit more difficult, which is maybe contrary to what some people think. So the knowledge that you've gained from this, the insights, would you say it's become more challenging or more, I don't say a life preserver, but more empowering?
It's become a lot more challenging, I would say. I think we talked about the gospel today, right? To those that much are given, much is expected. And so sometimes I almost wish that I had never heard the gospel, because then I wouldn't have to live it, right? Because now that I'm starting to understand it, maybe for the first time, I've got to do something about it. And that's not easy, And so it makes it a lot tougher, actually having some real knowledge about the faith, and actually taking steps to live it is the hardest part, in my opinion. But it's going to be worth it, right?
No, what rang for me was the concept of authentic virtue.
Oh, yeah, that I loved reading that passage, because I do that all the time. I'll be doing something and I'm being really humble right now. Look at me go, And it's like that happens all the time. That was a little bit of an eye opener for me. So
I first met this book as a sophomore or junior in college, and it was eye opening to me at that time. So to contemplate it in the detail in which you did is, to me, outstanding and incredible. And just congratulations.
thank you.
All right, last one. I gotta give a little shot here. Do you find that 'cause the devil's kind of scary, right? It's a scary dude. But after kind of just you said actualizing it, right? Does it make it easier or harder to live a Christian life, knowing that he's out there?
It makes it easier.
Why?
Because he's, like I said, he's no longer this idea.
Okay.
He's no longer just the punishment if I don't do the right things. He's the voice in your head all of the time, telling you to indulge in your virtue, telling you to stay annoyed at that person that you don't really know why you're annoyed at them, but you really hate them, right?
Yeah.
He's the guy telling you to dwell on those.
Yeah, right. And in some ways, what I was struck by when you talked about actualizing the devil was that it actually, obviously we're personally responsible for how we live our lives, but there's actually, you can take that too far to say that, I can do it all, right? Actually, there's forces out there against you, right? And it's not just you making decisions, right? There's other people, other forces that are making it hard for you. So to acknowledge that, it's almost like, okay, there's a fight going on, right? I'm not the only one that has to deal with it, but I also have this other help here.
Well, it's a lot of help, right?
Yeah.
The Lord is infinitely powerful, and we have him on our side, and that's what I think we ought to remember in these in these battles, because they're their battles. That's what they are.
Exactly right. And you also said very, I think, just tremendously how, you know, the devil just can't get God, can he?
Yeah. I love that description. Yeah.
There has to be something in it for him.
Yeah.
Like he did that up there, but there had to be some kind
Well,
of...
and I think the same thing most of the
Right.
time. I don't understand it.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And that's the thing. But
So it almost makes you, I think recognizing the devil almost makes you more humble.
I totally agree. Oh, I agree. Yes. It has humbled me reading this book. Yeah.
You know, and it humbles, I think it humbles everybody. So. All right, let's give him a round.
The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis is the story of the struggle for a soul. This story is told from the perspective of Screwtape, the undersecretary to Satan, through a collection of letters written to his nephew, Wormwood, a junior tempter who is trying to ensnare the soul of a young man living in England during the 1930s. Throughout the book, Screwtape gives advice to Wormwood on how to best ensnare the patient. By personifying two devils and making their world a real thing, the Screwtape Letters can help Christians defend themselves against the devil's attempts to ensnare us. Though early in the book, the patient becomes a Christian, Screwtape reminds Wormwood that the habits of the patient are still in the favor of hell. He teaches Wormwood how to keep the young man's mind off the truth of Christianity. Screwtape tells of how the idea of Christianity in this man's mind is very pictorial. This man subconsciously envisioned the church of togas, sandals, and shining armor. When he realizes that the people in church are normal people with average jobs, everyday struggles, annoying habits, or bad clothing, the man would then face the disappointment that we all face in our own lives. We find that the idea or dream of something is often much different and less romantic than the actual task at hand. God allows us to experience this disappointment because he wants us to love him freely, and at the same time be free to fail him as well. Screwtape encourages Wormwood to use that freedom to his advantage, for the freedom is what allows us to sin. After receiving a report from Wormwood that he thinks that his patient's religious phase is dying away, Screwtape lectures Wormwood on what he calls the law of undulation. He teaches Wormwood that humans repeatedly return to a level and fall back from it. Screwtape tells him that his patient is not going through this dry period as a result of Wormwood's crafty tempting, but that it is a natural occurrence that does tempters no good unless they properly exploit it. He warns Wormwood that God allows and even uses these troughs to strengthen man's love for him and cement their steadfastness. Nonetheless, there are many ways that Screwtape advises Wormwood to exploit the trough. He first tells Wormwood to tempt the young man to fall into sensual sins such as lust and gluttony, for it is more difficult for men to resist these temptations during a trough. He then tells Wormwood of an even better way of snaring the patient's soul. Screwtape advises Wormwood to talk to his patient of moderation, and trick the man into believing that the trough is not a trough at all, and to think that his original conversion to Christianity was excessive and overdone. Screwtape's final suggestion to Wormwood is to make the patient believe that he truly is losing interest in his faith by suggesting to him that it was just another phase, and the time has come to move on. He urges Wormwood to handle the trough carefully, as the Lord wants the patient to emerge from the trough a stronger Christian. When the patient falls in love with a Christian girl in his neighborhood, Screwtape urges Wormwood to plant seeds that will, after a long period of being together, cause these two people to hate one another. He explains that humans often fall into the trap of substituting a false and negative unselfishness for true charity. This can be increased by the difference in the two sexes' definition of unselfishness. Men tend to believe that unselfishness is not giving others any trouble, while women think that it is taking trouble for others. Screwtape tells Wormwood also to add to the confusion the expectation that it will always be easy to be unselfish towards your loved one, even after you have been married for a long time. Once this expectation is established, Screwtape explains, the husband and wife will argue for what they think is the wish of the other, and end up deciding on something that neither wanted, while both walk away feeling proud of their great charity and unselfishness, as well as a feeling that the other did not appreciate the great sacrifice that was made. Screwtape teaches Wormwood that a lot of false unselfishness is even more valuable than a little selfishness. Wormwood's patient is living at the beginning of the Second World War, a time of great uncertainty and fear. Because the young man's age makes it possible for him to be called to military service, Screwtape tells Wormwood to keep the man's mind filled with both fear and hope in order to protect his mind against the enemy. God wants man to think about the things we do. Satan wants us to think about what could happen to us. Screwtape also tells Wormwood to decide whether the patient should be an extreme pacifist or an extreme patriot. He writes that all extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, are to be encouraged. Screwtape explains to Wormwood that he should make his patient adamantly partisan, so that it begins as part of his religion, then becomes the most important part of his religion. Finally, the faith is only a way to justify the cause. When men make Christianity the means to any worldly end, we lose our faith on the way. Despite the attempts of Screwtape to help him, Wormwood is ultimately defeated in the struggle for the patient's soul. The man repented of his sins and renewed his faith after his period of spiritual dryness, was saved from the attacks on his chastity, and fell in love with a Christian girl whose family brought him into their circle of friends. These people strengthened his faith. When the Germans bombed the young man's town, he acted bravely, though he was very frightened, so he felt no pride at his bravery, and was even ashamed of his fear. When he died, his eyes were opened, and he saw Wormwood and realized what part the tempter had in his life. But it only lasted for a moment, for then the patient was taken by the angels to heaven, where he saw God. In Screwtape's final letter, he writes that he hopes to be given at least a bit of Wormwood to devour when Wormwood returns to hell for his punishment. The devil's most dangerous and successful tactic in the eternal war for all of our souls is the gradual and quiet path to hell. Screwtape writes to Wormwood, "Murder is no better than cards if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The devil's most effective way of snaring us is by tempting us to live the life of an okay person. The life that God wants us to live is a life that may be harder in the moment, but will allow us to live an eternal life with Him, not as an okay person, but as a saint in His holy army. In my own life, and all of our lives, the devil tries to tempt us with messages and images contrary to those of the Lord. In the secular world, there are songs, books, movies, and magazines everywhere that tempt us to follow the devil, though he may be disguised to look like something alluring and enchanting. God's way is the one that combats these messages with truth, goodness, and beauty. As the guardian angel for the patient, I would counter the attempts of Wormwood and Screwtape to dissuade the patient from Christianity during dull periods in his spiritual life by reminding the patient of a great saint who battled through a longer and more desolate time in his or her lifetime. If the patient was in the danger of being falsely unselfish during his courtship, I would encourage him to be honest with the girl and to go through a true sacrifice instead of one that simply builds up his own ego. During the air raids and dangers of the war, I would encourage the young man to turn to God during the uncertainty, instead of to a cause. Finally, I would counter the efforts of Wormwood and Screwtape by teaching the young man that true prayer is the most valuable weapon in his defense against temptation. If you turn to God in prayer whenever you are tempted, He will give you the steadfastness to withstand temptation and defeat the devil. The Screwtape letters makes devils in hell a very real thing, and reminds Christians that there are tempters all around us, trying to cause us to turn away from God. Many people have difficulty believing in demons or devils simply because they don't want to. If we don't accept the fact that hell and devils exist, it makes sinning much easier. By personifying two devils and making their world a real thing, the Screwtape letters can help Christians defend themselves against the devil's attempts to ensnare us.
I was struck when you were talking about the trough and how the devil should take advantage of the trough. And the word that popped into my head was relativism. You're just kind of just flattening things out.
Yeah, you talked a lot
Very well
about
done.
the trough, didn't you? Well, why did that strike you, do you think?
Well, I think it runs rampant in our world today, this idea of like phases, and kind of I feel like especially just kids my age, like you don't want to seem too devoted to anything at all because it's not really like cool or whatever. I think just to sort of be kind of lukewarm about everything. And I think the troughs are like, I think that is where the devil is working, is during those troughs to make that really prevalent.
Do you think that people feel safe by not committing?
Yeah, definitely. Because when you show that you really care about something that's actually real and authentic, then you're sort of vulnerable. And if people don't maybe agree with you, then you have to defend, which is difficult. It's difficult to defend something that you believe in.
First of all, great job. And I just loved how you said that God combats the devil by means of truth, goodness, and beauty. And what St. Michael Academy on, true, good, and beautiful. I just really love that.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, Cooper.
I really liked how you gave us like what you would do to combat screw tape and wormwood, and I thought that was good.
Yeah, Vinny.
One line that struck me specifically was your line of the devil's trying to push you to be an okay person, which goes along with that idea of lukewarmness that Mrs. Nolan brought up, that you brought up. Yeah, it's just really easy to go along okay and just feeling especially in that trial period, that at least it could be worse. It could be worse mentality. It's really difficult to get out of. That was really good thing to bring up.
Yes, Ms. Cooper.
I think you did a really nice job. I love your writing style and the word choice that you used. I think
Ian, great job. I liked that you brought out the idea of how the path to hell it's not like a precipitous drop, right? But it's very gradual, and it made me think about what then the path to heaven might be like what the path of virtue is like. Do you think that if hell is gradual, is heaven like just this super steep ascent, or is it some other way?
I would definitely say it's super steep because I have difficulty practicing virtue in my own life. I think it is. I think in order to choose virtue, it's always harder. I think maybe not. It's going to pay off in the end, but you'd rather. The easy thing is usually the thing that the devil wants you to do, which is not follow God. Yeah.
Just one more thing and then I'll shut up. But you talked about moderation, right? That kind of hit me. Just the fact that people think moderation is a good thing, and that's what Screw Tape is trying to make us think. You know, that kind of how he makes you think that if you convert that it's excessive, all right, and then you should cut back a little bit, and that kind of leads you gradually to hell. I thought that just kind of hit me.
Do you think that the devil tries to destroy passion? And so if you don't have, if your passion keeps getting eroded away, you become kind of this person that is just kind of like you were saying?
I think he can, take away passion or just corrupt it and twist it. Because God created everything that is good, and it is good to enjoy the things in the material world, but the devil can corrupt them, and that's where we get vice and sin is from that corruption.
Dr. Brake talks a lot about developing smart saints, and the saint part, which we're called to be saints, which frightens the heck out of me. But do you have a different perspective of what that means now that you've kind of reflected on this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we learn about the saints that have been canonized in the Catholic Church, it kind of seems impossible because a lot of them were these amazing people who started new religious orders and wrote these brilliant church documents, and it seems really unattainable. But when I read this, I feel like it makes it's still going to be really difficult to become a saint, but you don't have to, this young man, he never did anything really extraordinary or notable, no one really knew about him except for his close friends and family, right? But he defeated the devil in the difficult times and the sort of the smaller moments in his life, and that makes him a saint because he went to heaven.
All right. What wonderful job. Last thing, we learned a lot more about the story, didn't we, with Catherine? And I thank you for that. And you mentioned a little bit. What's going to happen to Wormwood since he failed getting the soul?
He's going to be eaten. And actually, when I read this, I was a little confused.
Yeah. Eaten and never going away.
It's like eternal torture, and he's always going to be being consumed.
Yeah. So these devils are working together, but they'll turn on each other on a dime and all of that. And, so how does that... So the patient, how does he die? Tell everybody how the patient dies.
During an air raid, I believe.
And he was kind of trying to save people's lives. So he was being a hero, right? And I think that, what does Christ say? No greater love is this than laying down a life for a friend, right? So you don't have to be super duper well known or anything like that. I think your insight is just totally spot on. The last thing I was struck by your excellent essay was this whole, I think people have already talked about this undulation, these troughs, right? And I think that today especially, there's almost like, here's a question for you. Can you be too Christian?
I don't know, you cannot.
Why?
But because to be a Christian is to be following Christ, and that's what we all need to do in order to get to heaven.
Right. Now, can you be too self-righteous as being a Christian? Can you do that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not good. But there's almost like this, we don't want to take this Christianity too seriously, right? And I think your essay really points out that that's a real danger. And Cooper kind of figured that out too, right? This moderation. Moderation in Christianity can you be that? I'm not sure. Not sure about that. Thank you so much. McCartan Moore.
Imagine a world with no consequences for any actions. In this world, there would be no right or wrong, good or bad in any way. It would be mindless chaos. There would be no society, no love, no meaning to life. This is exactly what the devil wants for humanity. He wants to reduce us to believing that we are merely animals, not made in God's image and likeness. C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, we meet a young devil named Wormwood, who is tasked with tempting a young man, the patient, and delivering him safely to hell. Wormwood is writing to his uncle, Screwtape, for instruction in the art of temptation. Screwtape is an older devil and a seasoned tempter who now works in an administrative position in hell. Together they work to undermine the enemy, God, and seek to claim the patient's soul for Satan. C.S. Lewis does a spectacular job of making this book appear to relate actual correspondence between two devils, despite being fiction. It teaches many true and worthwhile lessons. Of the many notable lessons that Screwtape tries to teach Wormwood about tempting his patient toward hell, 3 stand out. They regard pride, gluttony, and stewardship. Screwtape acknowledges that Wormwood's patient is becoming humble, which is a virtue and obviously a problem for the devils. He therefore instructs the young tempter to try to inflame his patient's pride and ego by using the patient's humility. Quote, catch him at the moment when he's really poor in spirit and smuggle into his mind the gratifying reflection, by Jove, I'm being humble. And almost immediately pride, pride at his own humility will appear, end quote. This shows that the devil is influencing every decision one makes and is always present. Even when one believes one is doing good, it can be turned into a sin in the blink of an eye. Just like the devil can use humility to inflate pride, he can weaponize other emotions, feelings, and desires to his own advantage. In order to produce the vice of gluttony, Screwtape uses wormwood to tempt his patient to be picky when it comes to food. Lewis explains that hell has changed its gluttony policy from gluttony of excess to gluttony of delicacy. Screwtape gives the example of another devil's patience who prefers tea and toast over most foods. Glubose has this old woman well in hand. She is a positive terror to the hostesses and servants. She is always turning from what she has been offered to her to say with a demure little sigh and smile, "Oh, please, please, all I want is a cup of tea, weak but not too weak, and the teeny weeniest bit of really crisp toast." You see, because what she wants is similar and less costly than what has been set before her, she never recognizes as gluttony as her determination to get what she wants. However, troublesome it may be to others, at the very moment of indulging her appetite, she believes that she's practicing temperance. In a crowded restaurant, she gives a little scream at the plate which some overworked waitress has set before her and says, "Oh, that's far, far too much. Take it away and bring me about a quart of it." If challenged, she would say that she's doing this to avoid waste. In reality, she does it because the particular shade of delicacy to which we have enslaved her is offered by the sight of more food than she happens to want. Today, gluttony of delicacy can be often observed. People want to be fashionable by eating vegan foods or drinking almond milk. Being very particular about food is a fad that has spread around this part of the world and unfortunately has been normalized. It is partly due to the explosion of food choices at stores and restaurants. When one believes that his time is his own, he's falling right into the snare of the devil. Screwtape instructs Wormwood to give the patient the idea that his time is his own. This way, the patient will be upset whenever something disrupts his plans. If God were to appear in front of the patient directly and ask for his time, the patient would never refuse. But the patient doesn't realize that that's what's happening every day. Screwtape also instructs Wormwood to give his patient a sense of ownership regarding things in addition to time. Quote, "We have taught men to say, 'my God,' in a sense not really different from 'my boots,'" end quote. But in the end, quote, either our father or the enemy will say 'mine' of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens, end quote. The idea that one is in charge of his own life and time instead of God is easy to fall into. And sometimes it's hard to comply when God does ask for things like mass attendance and daily prayers with one's family. The setting of the Screwtape letters is in England during World War II, and at about the time the German Luftwaffe is conducting air raids on London. This danger shapes the patient's soul. Screwtape instructs Wormwood to keep them in the maximum state of uncertainty and tempt him to focus on himself rather than those around him. But it does not work, and the patient tries to help others. The devil cannot decide whether to make the patient a patriot or a pacifist. They cannot decide whether to tempt him to cowardice because sometimes it produces self-awareness and ultimately courage. War is not necessarily bad for souls, quote, and how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless, end quote. Suffering is a tool that God uses to bring his children to himself. So suffering can be dangerous for the devils because sometimes it leads people right to God. Wormwood loses his patient when the man, at the point of death during a German air raid, recognizes Wormwood as the devil, and he fully embraces Christianity and is claimed by God. The patient's quick death while young is said to be better than living to be middle-aged and influenced even more by devils out there. Memento mori plays a significant role in reminding us that this life is all just the means, for the end is heaven. One must not be occupied with worldly things. Demons like Wormwood seek patience for hell. There is a constant battle raging for souls. A major warning to take from this book is that there are demons actively attempting to bring souls to hell. Every time someone says, "Oh, there really isn't hell, it's all made up to scare you," it only helps the real enemy, Satan. Demons like Screwtape and Wormwood do not want to know and believe that they exist. If souls actively look out for them, that would make their job so much harder. If every decision one makes, there is a demon and angel at one's shoulder, trying to influence the decision. Humans are not perfect. Don't let anyone say that they cannot be tempted. This is why confession exists. The devils have devalued warnings about worldly vanities, the choice of friends, and the value of time. The devil is most successful at snaring souls when he uses other people as his instruments. He may tempt them with the thought, oh, everyone else is smoking dope, it can't be that bad, or some other form of peer pressure. Just because everyone else is doing something does not mean it is virtuous or good. One good way to combat this kind of pressure is to cultivate a group of friends who are a good influence on you. I have been very blessed in my own life to have such good friends, influencing me in the right ways. Satan offers temporary pleasure but eternal suffering. God offers eternal pleasure and happiness after temporal suffering. Temporary pleasure is something that can draw one in, especially a teenager. One successful tactic that Satan has used in my life relates to time management. I don't want to have my time wasted, and I am tempted to think that Mass or saying the Rosary, that extra prayer, are taking time away that I need for something else. I have to stop myself from rolling my eyes and from acting annoyed. I seek to fix it by putting prayer into my schedule so I always have time for God. I am also susceptible to the temptation to be prideful and not humble. As Lewis points out, I can congratulate myself for being humble on the inside, which is really pride in another form. I think that real humility is a lifetime project and that prayer and confession help achieve it. God gave us the sacraments to help us in our spiritual warfare against the devils. There always have been a spiritual war occurring ever since Lucifer fell. Every human seems to have an angel and demon influencing everyday decisions. If I was the devil counterpart to Wormwood and Screwtape, I would be writing to the archangels for advice, as Wormwood does to Screwtape. If my person was tempted, I would offer the argument, is it really worth doing? Wormwood suggests that the patient go out to the bar drinking alone. I would counter with, what would that accomplish? And I might suggest a visit to church or some friends instead. But it would be much harder to persuade the patient if he went out and drinking with friends. I would try to influence his choice of friends. When the patient prays, Wormwood tries to distract his attention. I would then suggest that he isn't praying, merely saying words. Wormwood would try to influence the patient to speak harshly to his mother, in which case I would remind him of the fourth commandment. C.S. Lewis shows in an entertaining way that the devil has great influence over natural human desires, for he always suggests what is pleasant, but not what is right. Unfortunately, people have a hard time believing in the devil because they don't want to have to change their actions. Screwtape's #1 rule to Wormwood is not to reveal himself. If people do not believe the devil and hell, then the devil has them right where he wants them. But there is nothing to keep them in check, nothing to drive them to follow the 10 Commandments. They would all be bench warmers at church. There is no consequence for your actions when you die, then how can there be justice? The Screwtape Letters helps by shedding light on this whole matter in the way one shines light on a cockroach. C.S. Lewis brings to light what the devils want to keep hidden. The devil wants the perception that no one will judge your actions after death, for, as stated earlier, there would be nothing to drive a person to do the right thing. The Screwtape Letters should be a mandatory book for all Catholics and makes one aware that there's constant battle for one's soul.
Thank you very much. I think that was wonderful. I wanted to talk about time, because that was one of the great things that you brought out that I don't think had come up as much yet. So this idea that our time, we think that our time is our own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can really relate to that temptation. But also this idea that it's better to live a short life than a long life, because a long life gives the devils more time to get you.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Do you think that's true? Like, do you hope that you live a short life or a long life? What do you think?
Well,
what do you think about that?
And your mom is sitting right in front of you.
Exactly. So is it better to live a long life or a short life?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, the end goal is heaven, so you have to keep that in mind. So I would use St. Dominic Salvo as an example. He lived to be, 16? And he led a very holy life, and I think that's something something. I'm 15, so I think that's something I can replicate. If I was going to die next year, I would drop everything and go straight to God, because that's the right thing to do. But internally, I want to live till God comes. I don't really want to die. I don't want to suffer. But that's not what I'm called to do. I'm called to suffer, so I will do whatever it takes to get to heaven. Well, we have to depend on God in everything. He literally allows us to exist, and He set an example for us that I think we can all follow. And He's told us what not to do. So I guess to depend on His teachings, just think of yourself as a servant for everyone else. I mean, we've been talking in literature class about pride and how St. Augustine's had a tough time with that.
How you're using your time.
Yes, of course. Definitely. You better be worshiping God, because else you're going to go to hell. I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you may mean that you want to go to heaven, but you have to act with it. And you got to set time aside in order to do that. And that's hard for us modernists to do that, because we're always pulled in every which direction.
Yes, good.
I just wanted to ask you, so you talked about humility a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not quite sure the exact line, but it was like something about smuggling pride in inflating humility into pride.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to ask, what do you think are some ways that we can evade the devil doing that to us?
Be conscientious of it.
Mm.
I would think you could, when you say, oh, I'm being humble, then you could realize, oh, that's just the devil. What am I doing? You could you're like a triple agent of yourself.
He is clever, isn't he?
He is.
Thank you so much, Matt.
River Peace.
Hi everyone, I want to start by thanking you all for being here tonight. I know me and my fellow finalists and all the students here really appreciate it. I like to title my essays, so I'll start off with the title. So, The Devil's in the Details. We live in a world where we are constantly surrounded by signs of the degradation of mankind. From self-serving politicians who represent only their personal agenda to corruption at the heart of the highest church leaders, the human condition prevails. In the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, our eyes are opened wide to the enormously successful subtleties of the devil's tempting presence through the words of the tempters themselves, a veteran demon named Screwtape, and Wormwood, his student and nephew. Screwtape possesses an understanding of the human far exceeding our own grasp. Through a series of letters, Screwtape mentors his nephew, advising how to best tempt us mortals. Though a variety of methods are advertised to play upon a man's sins, the encouragement of possessiveness, pride, and extremity is the idea I find most interesting. If man will humble himself, he can begin to see his own faults reflected in Screwtape's words. A common human fault capitalized on by Wormwood and his student is possessiveness. Most of us feel anger when someone makes us late or wastes our time. This feeling of ownership encompasses not only time, but objects, the bodies we inhabit, and occasionally even God. Different religions see God as their God versus my God or our God. We believe we have a sense of ownership over everything we encounter, whether or not we recognize it. Screwtape encourages Wormwood to foster this possessiveness in his patient. Additionally, he says to delicately tempt the patient into developing vices like pride, slowly and steadily, to ensure the patient is unaware of the change. Wormwood's unnamed patient befriends a group of worldly and sophisticated people. Screwtape encourages his nephew to take advantage of this association. When the patient is in church, let him look at his fellow churchgoers and think he is above them because of his new friends. And when he is with his friends, let him think he is above them because he's Christian. Not only does this develop pride, but also hypocrisy. The exponential growth and development of vices, while the patient is unaware, or even better, feeling justified, is a lesson often called upon by Screwtape in his letters to Wormwood. For when humans acknowledge their vices, they'll seek to correct them, either through praying for mercy and thus showing humility, or trying to change their habits. World War II rages while Screwtape writes Wormwood, and in turn, Wormwood serves his patient. At first, the patient is concerned about the draft, and Screwtape wisely advises Wormwood to exploit these fears. When his town is being bombed by Germans, the patient's employment puts him at risk of death, greatly increasing his fear. Wormwood's challenge is to exploit this fear and manipulate it into cowardice without the patient knowing. Before Wormwood has the chance, though, the patient dies in an air raid and his soul is taken to heaven. Before his death, Screwtape knew the situation was dire, and he implored Wormwood with increasing urgency to keep the man alive. If he survived this trauma and made it to middle age, the patient could become attracted to worldly greeds and therefore easier to tempt. Young people in general are dreamers, detached from the world and focused on themselves, Christian or otherwise. When the patient died, there was no chance for a recovery. He was lost from the grip of the demons. Because of Wormwood's failure, he would be eaten alive by the other demons, and Screwtape is excited at the prospect of devouring his nephew's very essence. The Screwtape Letters teaches many valuable lessons about how we can avoid the common temptations we face. One of these lessons is the idea of Christianity versus Christianity. When we use Christianity as a means to something else, or believe ourselves to be Christians and scholars, or Christians and workers, we put our faith second or equal to something else in our lives, rather than before all else. Additionally, Screwtape masterfully manipulates us, using minor annoyances we find in others, including those we love, and gently guiding us into grudges we didn't previously hold. The devil is subtle, and I believe it is this subtlety that makes the tempter so successful and so very powerful and dangerous. Virtues such as bravery and patience can be distorted into pride. Time spent at church meant for quiet worship can be corrupted into the patient's distraction by his fellow churchgoer's shortcomings. These tactics slowly chip away at the goodness of man, leading to the constant decay of the general public's virtues. While reading about the human condition through the eyes of Screwtape and Wormwood, I was able to identify the tactics most effectively used by demons in my own life. Pride, masked as false humility. Ambitions to use my God-given gifts morphed into a need to be better than the rest. I've striven for most of my life to win while constantly moving the goal line farther and farther away. These faults have led to my worldly success, but have cost spiritual contentment. In reading the Screwtape Letters, I have a better understanding of my own vices. I compare my victories to those of my peers and criticize myself harshly whenever I don't meet the impossible standards I've set for myself. Through recognizing my own weaknesses, praying for guidance, and rationally breaking them apart, I've begun to change for the better. If I were the counterpart to Wormwood, a guardian angel designated to guide souls to heaven, I would turn Screwtape's lessons against him. Humans inevitably will make mistakes and fall into temptation. I think what's key for all humans is to identify when they falter, whether it's a great act of sin or a small judgment of someone thought privately. This is the advice I would consistently give to the young man in the Screwtape Letters, and the advice I attempt to follow daily. Once we recognize our faults, we can seek forgiveness and seek to change our behavior. Christian or not, our conscience will lead us to our wrongdoings and create a salutary feeling of guilt. We live constantly surrounded by the degradation of mankind. But there is much more to this life than the failure we encounter. From small acts of human goodness to the beauty of our natural world, we choose to be reflections of God's will, even when it is not easy. Screwtape views humans as creatures with a limited view of truth, but I view us as a race with the potential to change. The demons who tempt us are so set in their ways, unable to grow. But we have our entire lives to adapt and learn. That's the human condition, not our faults. The devil's in the details, yes, but so are we. Thank you.
Again, what I'm struck by is just how the variety of different approaches to the same topic, right? Just really wonderful. And so any observations, anything that you're struck by? Yes, Mrs. Keefe.
Great job and wonderful job by all of you. So River, a couple things. First of all, I just love your delivery. Your eye contact and your phrasing, emphasis is great. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I guess the other part that I liked with yours was how you talked about if you were the guardian angel. So we're sort of taking that same look at the devil, but the other force working within you. I liked how you did that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
The way you write is very eloquent. It's not flowery, it's just very, very descriptive and vivid. And one of the things you brought up is the fact that the devil has an understanding of humanity far surpassing our own. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to bring up, that we think very highly of ourselves. We think we're very intelligent. But these powers higher than our own are much more, go far beyond us. And I think that was something that you really made me focus on when we were talking. I thought it was really well done.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they know more than us?
Well, that's how they were created, and how we were created. It's a contrast of how God intended those creatures to be.
Yeah. Okay. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I would just say it's. I mean, they're originally angels, right? And angels were created with this complete intellect, and they made their choice at the beginning of time. And I think that's what makes these demons in our lives so effective, right? It's because they know us sometimes maybe better than we know ourselves. They understand what's going on in human society, and it's what helps them to make their claim, I guess.
Yes, Mr. Dad.
Yeah, so one thing you said scares the heck out of me. But it's true, and it's that we have faults, or subconscious vices that we're not even aware of. You brought up how the Christian can go to church and think he is morally superior to his fellow church people, and then you brought up how he can go out with a pint with his mates, or to have a pint with his mates, and he'll feel superior to them because he's a Christian and so forth, and he won't even recognize that he has these faults or this pride. So my question is, how can we as Christians, how can we figure out what these subconscious vices are so that we can attack them and fix them?
Yeah, I think the best way, and this has kind of been iterated by my peers so far, it's just that self-reflection. It's being able to, maybe at the end of the day, I do this as I'm laying in bed, kind of rewind through my day and kind of watch it as a fast-paced movie and kind of analyze what were the actions I did, what were the words I said. And I found that through kind of that post-analyzation, I'm able to better catch myself in the moment. I'm able to realize, oh wait, I'm judging this person because of something that I don't see the whole picture of. Oh wait, I'm thinking these negative thoughts about what a person said or did, and that's not my place. So I think it's really just that idea of reflection and being able to know yourself well enough to know what you're doing wrong.
Thank you, and great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Whitman.
Yeah, thank you, River. That was an excellent paper. And the same would go to Mac and Catherine and Will. You talked about Screwtape's, his friends, the worldlings. And so I have 3 questions, but 2 are yes or no, so it'll be really quick. Is that okay?
Yeah.
When he's hanging around these people, does he start to become like them?
Yes.
Yeah, and then the young woman whom he starts courting, and her family, does he start to act like them when he's around them?
Definitely.
So given that, in the spiritual life, what role does friendship, and then the tendency we have to imitate the people whom we admire, how is that at the same time a danger and a great opportunity in the spiritual life?
Yeah, so I think the patient is a great example. It's a great opportunity when you associate yourself with the right people, when you're making those correct, or maybe not correct, but just holy friends that you can use as role models and not bad examples. But it's hard to tell the difference when you're in the moment because, emotions get in the way. And if you like this person as a friend so much and you want to spend time with them, it's kind of hard to maybe realize that they might be a bad influence on you. But the first thing that I thought of when you mentioned this was we had a discussion last year in Latin class about how when you try to emulate someone, you're really kind of trying to get rid of yourself When you look at whether it's a fictional character or a celebrity and you're trying to kind of imitate what these traits about them that you really enjoy, you're kind of admitting that you don't really like certain traits about yourself and you want to get rid of those. So it's kind of like that destruction of self. So that's another area where it can be a danger, not only if you're having bad examples, but if you're trying to change yourself for the wrong reasons. If you're trying to emulate these people because they're scholars or really like holy people and you admire them as Christians, that's a great thing. And as long as you don't think, oh, I'm a terrible person, they're good, okay, I'll do what they do. But it has to come out of this place as like, I acknowledge my faults and know I can learn, but it doesn't mean I'm a terrible human being.
Yeah, and then I guess last thing, who are we ultimately called to imitate, and who is a good role model going to point us toward, instead of their own being, they're going to point us toward?
Jesus.
Yes, I think so.
The ultimate role model, definitely.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Youngstown.
So, I want to thank you for pointing out, which this all comes to fruition with what you guys are saying, that even though Screwtape and Wormwood are after us and they can get us, our greatest strength against them lies in our ability to change.
Yeah, definitely. It's so true, and that's definitely kind of the repeating theme of the Screwtape Letters was that they didn't understand God and they didn't understand us, really, because they were trying to stick us in this constant state, and that's just not really what human beings do, because we always have that ability to repent. No matter if it's the last second of our lives, we can always turn back to God and turn back to what's right.
Yes, Mr. Beers.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really nice. I also thought that the thing you said at the end about our ability to change really struck me, because it provides a kind of contrast in this question of whether we want to live a long life or a short life, right? And actually, it is okay to want to live a long life if you want in that life to learn how to love God, right? Because there's that recognition of your failure is recognition that this person that you actually want to love, you're not loving very well. And so it's actually very comforting, right, to see, oh, I have time to learn how to love this person because I want to love them better, you know? So that I thought was really interesting, because it gives you a way of saying it's okay to want to live for a long time, you know?
Yeah. But it's also at the same time like that dangerous trap to fall in, like, oh, I've got so much time, like I can put off loving God till tomorrow because, you know, we never know.
Anything else? Yeah, I was really struck by that. Sometimes it really does come back to this issue of time, right? I think all of you kind of talk about it. And, you know, when you recognize that it's not your own, and it's a gift, then it opens up so many, I mean, I think there was this great part where he talks about false modesty.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this idea that, you know, oh, Christians just want to be so humble and be mild-mannered and just kind of get run over. That's not what he's calling for either.
Exactly.
Right? And, you know, when I hear you, I mean, you know, such a strong, you know, the way you titled your essay and, you know, just hit it home. And that's a very strong message. I'm glad people are there like you who have a not pride maybe, but a sense of confidence, right? We want to be confident in terms of our faith and all that, but it has to be for him.
Right. It's again comes down to the intentions of where it comes from. But it's also something that I find interesting in my own life, and I kind of saw it reflected in The Patient a little bit, was it's that very thin line to walk of being humble, but then being like a bad form of humble, where it's you think you're like little, but it's like you want to acknowledge what you're good at, and you want to acknowledge that you are a child of God, made for a purpose, and that you are a created being.
You have talents.
Exactly,
right?
But then it's like that line. Yeah, it's that line to walk between that pride, thinking you're amazing and the best, or like thinking everybody else is better than me and I am nothing.
Right.
So it's interesting to kind of see that relationship played out.
He talks about this in his personal writings about how he struggled with pride.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, he has a lot to be proud about.
I mean, look at all that.
Well,
That's a lot to be proud about.
Think about the 2 or 3 people in the 20th century that brought more people to Christianity. It's hard not to think about him. Right?
Definitely.
Last thing, he has this great thought, like, put Christ on like a coat. Think about that analogy, and that's from Mere Christianity. Again, I found it fascinating to learn that he was writing both of these things at the same time. That, like, we need, I saw Miss Kovac, she left. But she was cold, she put her coat back on, right? I mean, we need that covering of Christ, right? And so when we recognize that, it just, the doors open, don't they?
Yeah, so true.
It just opens up. And so the self-realization, knowing we're weak, turning it over to Him, it's actually, it's the best kind of empowerment. It's not this false empowerment that the secular world talks about. It's true empowerment. Thank you so much.
I mean, I think I'm out of a job right there to start teaching. I can just go home, right? It's unbelievable. I mean, just these are the nights that make it all worthwhile, to be honest with you. Let me tell you what the judges said. It was it's David Krause. He wanted to be here, but he was out of town, and a lot of these folks are from. There's a couple of people from around here too, but some of it worried about COVID and stuff like that. So they send their regrets because it was. I don't know if you were here last year, but he was just wowed by the entire thing. So he said, dear Rich, attached are the results of our judges' reading and ranking. As one of the participants said, quote, I feel privileged to have read these fine essays. Another said, this is a little bit more kind of stream of consciousness, wow, oh, wow. And he goes, how's that for deep reflection? But it does sum up the essays, right? All right, wow. 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders. Okay, and then just to give you an idea of how close it was, one final thing: the judges, as well as the Lewis planning team, wondered if all 4 places could receive acknowledgement as well, right? So instead of 1, guess what we got? So they bought us our book sets, right? So that was cool, and then they chipped in half of the cash prizes that the recipients are going to get. So we shared the cost. So it's not a huge amount of money, but the first place winner is going to receive $300. Second place, $150. Third place, $100. Fourth place, $50. Put them in your savings accounts. All right. Now that we've all talked about how we're going to make all these right choices, right? Okay. All right. So again, we'll just kind of do this quick, right? Because I know we're tired. So 4th place. And again, we're all winners here, but 4th place, Mr. Mac Moore. Good job. All right. Absolutely. And then again, we're all winners here, but number 3 is Miss Catherine Hayes. And second place, Miss River Pease. Number 1, Mr. William Gagnon.